Hey guys. Huh? Yeah, I'm eating some licorice. It's been a minute. It's there's almost St. Ignace truck show time. Truck show's in less than 2 weeks. Well, a week and a half before I leave. And yeah, I just finished really the last of the odds and ends on the Lodestar camper. We'll show you that in another video. Trim, loose ends, sealing, caulking, you name it, all that stuff. Heater hookup, all the odds and ends. It's all done. I do have 2 more pieces of trim I gotta get, and I'm gonna repaint my propane tanks. Other than that, it's done. But the other project that I've been meaning to get done before that trip is Jake brakes on the L9000. Come on, let's check it out. So, I started without you. We got the passenger seat out. Passenger seat has to come out so that doghouse can come out, and boom! The shifter really should come out, but you can sneak it around without pulling the shifter. So, yeah, there's the L10, fully 60% of it. You know, inside the firewall. So we got to get that valve cover off because we got to get after this process. I hope this goes reasonably well. We shall see. All right, so if you guys will remember, I bought this Jake brake setup from Cab Over Gary down in Texas. He shipped them up to me months ago now. What he gave me was the riser, the spacer, to fit the Jakes. And there's the Jake heads themselves, as well as the bridges and most of the big hardware and the fuel pump switch. Cut me a really good deal on that stuff, to be honest with you. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, I really appreciate that he did. I then went to Cummins, and because I had found this online, and the 404BG is what we use for this motor, and of course it has all the parts breakdowns, and a few parts I was able to get that Cummins down in Texas told Gary weren't available. Mostly it's this little guy right here. This double, kind of a double donger there, if you will. That is the oil fitting, and then that guy, and that guy, and that guy, I believe. What those do, where Gary fought to get that to seal up. It's right through there. So I got to get that all cleaned up, and some of that we can know ahead of time. But you know, I'm sorry, I'm getting OCD here, cleaning RTV off, but that's where the oil line passes through. So I believe the only thing I don't have, some miscellaneous O-rings. I got to look up my parts diagram and see where those go. But I think the only thing I don't have is maybe some wire to build the harness, as well as the oil line itself. That we'll get everything installed, and then we'll measure for that oil line. I'll get that made this week coming up here. But you know, the goal is that we can get this stuff on. We'll run the overhead again as part of this, obviously. But the cool thing is that, again, I printed off online. I like paper, but it gives us this installation manual gives us everything we need to do, step by step by step. I've gone through it and read it months ago, so I don't remember anything now. But regardless, we got everything we need. You know, we got our cool little switch, our off, low, high. Sorry, off, low, high. Dash switch. Got our clutch switch and the harness, the bracket for that, official Jacobs parts. So yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is Cummins stuff, but obviously Cummins sells the Jake brake stuff, and I think we basically got everything we need. So I'm gonna start working on some assembly on some of this, and then we'll get the valve cover off and start following these directions. Well, it's the next day. I made a little more progress. I've not loosened anything up in the valve train yet, but I am ready to right now. So I've set the engine via the front gear train. I've set to the A position, which in Cummins L10 land means that cylinder number 5 on an STC motor like this is loose, valves closed, or valves open, I guess I should say. Yeah, we're ready to, all these rocker arms got to get loosened up, because these are the Jake hold down points. You know, those same, we just put the Jacobs longer bolts in. So that's all set, ready to go. And we got to obviously change the exhaust bridges and some other stuff before we put that on. I also vacuum up my shavings, but I installed the clutch switch. Right, so when the free play is gone is where the switch gets disengaged. So we're right there. Dash switch is pretty easy. I'm not going to go up into the panel because I hate pulling these panels off. It seems like every time I do, something comes unclipped. A light doesn't work, whatever. Half these holes are stripped out, so because it's an old truck, we're going to leave that be, and we are going to put our switch right there, just left of the ashtray. We got a light right there for the underglow thing, but that's a good spot. It's right in front of the shifter. It's right close to where my hand can reach it. I think that's a good spot for a Jake brake switch, so that's going to go there. The wiring on this whole deal is painfully easy. What I'm not looking forward to, so this switch Cab Gary gave me, I have to loosen up some bolts on the front of the pump. It's a pain in the butt, quite frankly, because this is an L10 in an L9000, which means it's sunk low in the frame, and it's a short hood truck, so the pump is way far back and way too low. So when we get to that point, we're going to pull this steer tire. It's going to make life a little easier, and not looking forward to that part of the job. So we're gonna get the Jakes mounted first. The other thing I did was a little rattle can restoration on the valve cover bolts and the Jake riser. So that stuff should be all, that was a few hours ago. Oh yeah, we're all tacked up. All right, y'all. Well, first thing we're gonna do is we're going to loosen all 18 of our rocker arms. On the injectors, we are totally getting rid of these adjusting screws. They go bye-bye, because we are replacing, and we're going to pull those. We need a better spot to put these. Also bleeding everywhere because of course I already busted a knuckle. Officially got my blood on there. That's awesome. Okay, so now I've got the replacement Jacobs adjusting screws. I got them sitting here in some engine oil. We're gonna install those loose. Alright, so the next step is we've got to get these guideless Jacobs crossheads in. First we got to make sure we're looking at this motor right. Yeah, so those are my exhaust valves. So we'll go ahead and start back here on the two easy ones. We're going to keep those guys separate. Okay. So now, those push rods out of the way. Get those up. And I'll tell you, these certainly look a lot different, but according to the old manual, so there's the factory Cummins guided crosshead, and there's our Jacobs guideless. But according to this manual, we can use these. I mean, it's just a bridge ultimately. And yes, these are lubricated with engine oil. I've got them literally sitting in a bucket of fresh oil over here. So closest to the rocker shaft is where the pin goes. So those girls just sit in there like that. And that's that. Okay, so according to the manual, the next step is actually to install the spacer. And I'm going to do one little step in between before I do that, because I think it's going to be a little easier, is I'm going to loosen these rocker shaft bolts. Those get replaced with Jacob units, and I just feel like that's going to be a lot easier to do. I mean, not a lot, but it's going to be a little easier to do. Alright guys, well, crisis averted. We did drop, had one injector push rod get away from me and drop down into the, whatever you want to call it, the valley.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber.
Alright, and here is the Jake riser. There we go. A little fresh Cummins tan, a little rattle can restoration, and some fresh expensive bolts from Cummins. All right, guys. Here's where the fun begins. Get that hose out of the way once and for all. Just a breather hose, but it likes to be in my way. So, time to... Now, what I've done is I have loosened the adjusting screws on the Jakes, so there's no pressure on those rockers. And I've installed the oil crossover tube. This is, in fact, the rear housing. It says rear right on it. So now what we're going to do is some more of that fresh motor oil. We're going to make sure these are nice and lubed. Okay, so the Jakes are at least loosely installed. The hold down cap screws are started everywhere. Everything's in good shape. The next step involves some feeler gauges and aligning the Jakes. And I honestly think I'm going to let my brother-in-law came over today and kind of looked at everything with me and made sure we had everything we needed, we think. But I think I'm going to see when he can work it into his schedule to come over and help me, because that process and the feeler gauges and then lashing the valves and running the overhead in general, he's the one that helped me the first time I did that. And I think I'm going to utilize his expertise again. So I think I'm going to leave the Jakes where they sit for the moment, and I'm going to jump back onto wiring. Like I say, here I showed you, I think I've got the clutch switch is already wired. So we've got to do the dash switch as well as what I'm dreading, which is the pump switch, throttle switch. So I'm going to get this wheel pulled and start working on those other two things. So hopefully we can have everything loomed and wired. And then I also got to take another look at my oil line and take some measurements and figure out what I got to have there to have a line made this week. And that way, hopefully by the time he comes over to run the overhead with me and get everything lashed, I've got the rest all in place. And once we lash the valves, we can throw that valve cover on and fire her up and make sure we're good to go. All right, guys, well, it is the following weekend. Yeah, I rustled up some parts this week. Nothing like down to the wire. It's Saturday afternoon. Just got back from a cross-country meet for my daughter, and yeah, we got to pull out with this thing loaded with that thing in like 5 days. Thursday afternoon, we're pulling out. So let me show you what I worked on. My brother-in-law's on the way over right now. He is a ace diesel mechanic. Actually, he has spent most of his career doing major rebuilds on anything from mid-size diesels on up to marine diesels. Like, I'm talking marine diesels, like fit yourself inside the cylinder bore marine diesels. So he's a rebuilder. So installing some Jakes and running the overhead on an L10 is it's pretty much child's play for him. So let me show you what we got. Okay, so a few things have been accomplished. Let me move this ladder. I made my own bracket for the throttle switch. So you can see it. That's my bracket, just some angle iron that I tapped and drilled. And we've got the Jake switch. You can still see it up there. It says Jacobs. And you can see what happens is when the throttle comes back, it engages. The problem I had is that this switch was meant to mount to those bolts right there on the ejection pump, and because of the nature of an LN9000 with a short hood, this is my throttle linkage. That's the clutch linkage, but the throttle linkage is back behind, and it uses this bracket here and this essentially reverser so that it's a push-pull setup. You can see what it does. It inverts the motion. So unfortunately, that bracket is completely in the way for the factory Jacobs bracket, that the kind of generic bracket it comes with. for a Cummins. So I had to make something. But anyway, it works. We still got to wire it, but that's done. I think I showed you before, but clutch switch is installed. The actual Jake switch is installed. We got the harnesses pre-ran for that because that's kind of hard to get to. I think I showed you last week, but the Jakes themselves and the Jake riser are on. And then last but certainly not least, I got my oil line. You can see we pulled it off right there, off of the oil filter block, the rear oil filter. I'm going to loom some of this still so it's protected where it kind of rubs around on the frame here, and then I'll tuck it down into the frame rail. But we've got our oil line looped way up out of the way. It'll drop down there so it's clear of the turbo, but comes way up around up front. I gave it lots of room, and then come right up to the top there. And so the Cummins fitting I got was about 50% of what I needed. It just wasn't right. So this is what my hydraulic guys and I came up with. So that's just an 1/8 inch nipple, and we got this little bushing dealio. And what happens is factory Cummins parts and that O-ring, the O-ring's a little bit of a tight squeeze, but it fits. The O-ring tucks around, and then our outer Cummins flange will bolt on, and then just for good measure we'll put sandwich a nut on, hold everything nice and snug, and then we just adapt to JIC. Bada bang, bada boom. There's our line. Bob's your uncle. Freaking perfect. So I love a good hydraulic guy. We're lucky around here to have a really good hydraulic shop called Nelson Hydraulic. Actually, two. They're actually related, I think, but the other shop is called RC Hydraulic. They're really good too. Nelson kind of specializes in lines. They do some pump work too. So I split my dollars between the two of them, but both extremely good, handy for equipment, trucks, you name it. So anyway, there's our line. So he's coming over. We're gonna set the Jake tolerances. We're gonna run the overhead. We're gonna get those push rods back in, and then all I have to do is some simple wiring, and we're in business. Well, we got the overhead ran, but we screwed up. I was using the wrong table. We were using the Select table, CELECT, Cummins Select. We should have been using this one, the pre-91 top stop injectors, because that's what I've got. So consequently, our injector timing was off. When we fired the motor, she was smoky. That's what happens when injector timing is off. You're getting fuel at the wrong time and at the wrong rate. So I've gone through, and you can see my little check mark there. I have done my A position. Now I've barred it over to position B, so the next rotational one in line. So cylinder number 4 should have, my intake and exhaust valves should be loose right now because they're at top dead center, and I should go out to cylinder number 1. So let's check. There we go. We got play. We got play. So yes, cylinder number 4 is at TDC. And if you compare, if you look close, so this one I've already ran. This is the injector. And I don't know if you can tell on camera, but look at where, yeah, too close. But anyway, if you could see the number of threads sticking out, and then we compare it like to that injector, it's really hard to tell on camera, but we've got a second thread showing is where our previous injector adjustment was, and I am barely one through showing here. So injector was not bottomed out. So she's wrong. So anyway, I got to go through and do 5 more positions here, and reset injectors, set that valve cover back on, and we'll fire it up again and make sure she's running good before we test any Jakes out. All right, well, I reset injector timing, and we are much better. She barely smoking. Alright, so that's solved. She sounds right. I don't hear any, no valve clatter. Okay guys, well we're close. We're running right now. We got no oil leaks. That all looks good. Surprising, so far so good on that thing. That came out pretty damn good. I'm pretty thrilled with that. But there is still a procedure that we have to do here to bleed the brake unit. These have been off a truck, you know, for a year basically. Not ran in longer than that. So yeah, they got to be bled. So basically I got to pull this valve cover back off. I don't really even know why I installed it, but I did. Start engine allowed to run for 5 or 10 minutes. We've done that. Accelerate engine to approximately 1800 RPMs, then release the throttle and manually depress each solenoid armature. Repeat this procedure 5 or 6 times to permit engine oil to fill the brake housing passages completely. Connect control wires to terminal lead-out assemblies, blah, blah, blah. Then we wire. That's what's left. But before I go to all that trouble, I want to make sure these are bled and then run a jumper wire and manually run these boys to make sure that we're functioning before we go spend the time on building the harness. So, all right, off with her head. All right, guys, well, I got a shit-eating grin on my face because these jakes sound amazing. So I went through the bleeding procedure, which was really easy. So literally I just sat in the driver's seat, wrapped it up to 1800 RPMs with my hand on the solenoids, and after on each of the two jake heads, it was about the fourth push, manual push on the solenoid, and I started to hear bah, 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 as I let off the throttle, and you know, the book said 5 to 6 times, and by number 6 on both sides, she was crack-a-lacking. So we know that both solenoids are good, at least in terms of manual operation. Now, of course, the question is, do these solenoids still operate? Obviously, then they came off Gary's truck, they operated. We're going to count on that. So I'm going to go ahead and build the wiring harness now. With everything in place, that's going to be fairly quick. We'll get that harnessed up and loomed. And then, because I want to run these jakes before I put the doghouse and the passenger seat back in, just in case there's an issue. There's no reason to have to go through all that work twice. So I'm going to get after it. All right, guys. Well, you probably won't be able to hear me, so I'm going to yell into the phone. But we're out for a spin. We got to test out some jakes. naysayers to L10s. I'm telling you, it's a good little motor. And they sound mean. Just mean. All right, well, the Jake brake install was a success. That truck's ready to haul, huh? That truck is ready to haul. That truck in about 4 days. It's Sunday night. Everything's put back together. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. Y'all take care.